Because in any criminal investigation, 58 days without a named suspect is not simply the passage of time. It is a statement. It tells you something about what happened, and more importantly, about what did not happen in the first hours of this case. Today we are going deep, not surface level deep, not here are the 5 things you didn't know deep. We are going to walk through every layer of this investigation, the timeline, the evidence, the forensics, the psychology, and finally, the thing that a former U.S. Surgeon General said on national television that changed the entire context of this story. We are talking about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Grandmother, an 84-year-old woman with a bad back and a pacemaker who vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills, north of Tucson, Arizona, on the night of January 31, 2026. And we are talking about the argument, not a rumor, not online speculation, but a documented, peer-reviewed, academically validated argument that this investigation may have been running on the wrong track from the very first hour. Stay with me, because this gets deep, and every single second of it is documented. I need to say this clearly, directly, and without qualification, because this is a conversation that gets poisoned very quickly when people hear certain questions being asked. On February 16, 2026, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos issued an official public statement. His words, "The Guthrie family, all siblings and their spouses, are cleared as possible suspects." He added, "The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious and are victims in this case. To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel." He also confirmed that DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home does not match her or, in his phrasing, anyone in close contact to her. That is settled. The family is not guilty. That is not what this video is about. What this video is about is process. Specifically, it is about whether the process of this investigation was set on the right track in its first critical hours, and whether anyone has gone back to examine that track from the outside. That is a very different question, and it is the one that nobody in authority has publicly answered. Let's go back to January 31st, 2026. A Saturday. At 5:32 in the afternoon, Nancy Guthrie left her home. She took an Uber, the destination, her daughter Annie's house, for dinner, games, family time. An ordinary Saturday evening for an 84-year-old woman who still showed up for the people she loved. The Uber driver who made that trip was later interviewed by investigators. Sheriff Nanos confirmed this publicly. No details of that interview have ever been released. Nancy spent the evening with Annie, Annie's husband Tommaso Chiong, and the family. At approximately 9:45 to 9:48 that evening, family members drove her home. The official sheriff's timeline, confirmed across multiple outlets, places her arrival at 9:48 p.m. The garage door opened. 2 minutes later, it closed. Nancy was home. As far as anyone knew, she was safe. Nobody outside that house would know anything had gone wrong for nearly 14 hours. Now I need you to pay close attention here, because what follows is not speculation. These are documented, verified timestamps from independent sources, and together, they form the clearest picture we have of what actually happened that night. Timestamp 1, 9:48 p.m., January 31st Street. Nancy arrives home. Garage door opens, closes 2 minutes later. She is inside. Timestamp 2, 1:47 a.m., February 1st Street. The Ring doorbell camera at Nancy's property disconnects. Not because it malfunctioned, because someone was already at the door. The camera was being covered. This is confirmed by the footage later recovered from cloud storage. Footage we'll discuss in detail shortly. Timestamp 3, 2:12 a.m. A separate security camera at the property detects motion. Timestamp 4, 2:28 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker drops its connection. The device that had been transmitting her cardiac data continuously to her cell phone goes silent. An 84-year-old woman with serious mobility limitations, whose back pain on most days prevented her from walking more than a few feet, is no longer traceable. Her phone is in the house, her purse is in the house, Her medication is on the counter. That pacemaker timestamp is the most important data point in this entire investigation. It was produced by a medical device. It is independent of any human account. It cannot be coached. It cannot be influenced. It tells investigators with reasonable precision when Nancy Guthrie was likely moved out of that house. And it anchors everything that follows. 2:28 a.m. on February 1, 2026, is the closest thing this case has to a confirmed, forensically clean abduction window. The window between 1:47 a.m. when the camera was covered and 2:28 a.m. when the pacemaker disconnected is approximately 41 minutes. In those 41 minutes, whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie happened. For the next 9.5 hours, the world went on. Nancy did not call anyone. No alarm was triggered. No automated system flagged the pacemaker disconnection. No neighbors saw anything unusual. At 11:56 the following morning, Sunday, February 1st, a church friend of Nancy's noticed she had not appeared for their weekly online church service. A Sunday routine Nancy kept faithfully. The friend contacted the family. Annie and Cameron Guthrie went to their mother's home. They were on the property, searching it, for approximately 1 hour before anyone dialed 911. That call came in at 12:03 p.m. Deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived at 12:15 p.m., 12 minutes after the call. Somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour after the family had first walked through the door. That 1 hour window is the first thing every serious investigator should have been asking about. Because in criminal investigation, the integrity of a crime scene is not a technicality. It is the foundation of the entire case that follows. Investigators are trained. This is not an opinion. This is academy-level criminal justice protocol to approach any scene involving potential evidence of a violent crime with the understanding that everything is potentially critical. Every displaced object, every surface, every open door, every smeared window. And they are trained to regard anyone who moved through that space before them as a variable that cannot be controlled, cannot be recovered, and cannot be undone. It does not matter who those people are. It does not matter how certain investigators are of their innocence. The protocol is the protocol because evidence is irreversible. You either preserve it or you don't. There is no middle ground, and there is no going back. In this case, law enforcement did not have first contact with Nancy Guthrie's crime scene. The family did. When Annie and Cameron arrived at their mother's home that Sunday morning, here's what they encountered. And I want you to hear this clearly, because we only know what they found through their own account, which is itself part of the problem we'll be discussing. The back doors of Nancy's home were propped open. There was blood on the front doorstep. The Ring doorbell camera had been physically yanked from the wall. Savannah Guthrie revealed these details publicly for the first time in her March 26, 2026 interview with Today's Hoda Kotb, the first time she had spoken publicly since her mother's disappearance. She described the family's initial confusion. They thought Nancy might have had a medical episode. That paramedics had come in the night had taken her out the back on a stretcher. They processed the scene through the lens of an innocent explanation first. And then they saw the blood, and then they understood. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, analyzing those propped back doors, argued that they most likely indicate perpetrators entered through the rear of the house and left the door open for operational purposes, either for their own exit route or to allow additional individuals to access the property. Retired NYPD detective Michael Alcazar went further, suggesting that a propped door signals multiple perpetrators rather than a single actor working alone. These expert analyses, and this is critical, are built entirely on Savannah's public description of what her family found when they arrived, because that is the only account of what those doors looked like that morning. The family described them to law enforcement when deputies arrived at 12:15 p.m. Law enforcement did not observe them independently. That is the pattern, and it runs through every piece of primary evidence from that crime scene in those first critical hours. The doors, the blood, the missing camera, the context in which each of those things was found. The investigators who walked in at 12:15 p.m. were walking into a scene that had already been processed, psychologically and physically, by the family. In the hours after Nancy was reported missing, while investigators were still processing the scene, Savannah placed a phone call to her brother Cameron. He already had a theory. She confirmed this directly in the March 26th Today interview. In her words, "Even on the phone when I called him, he knew. He knew. He said, I think she's been kidnapped for ransom." Before a note had arrived, before investigators had publicly characterized what they were dealing with, before Sheriff Nanos held a single press conference, the family had already framed this as a ransom kidnapping. And that framing was communicated to investigators from the first hours of their involvement. 2 days later, on February 3rd, the first ransom note arrived. Tucson's KVOA television station received it through their tip submission system. TMZ received a copy the same day. A second communication arrived at KVOA on February 6th, sent from a different IP address but using similar anonymizing software. Both notes carried details about the interior of Nancy Guthrie's home that had not been publicly released. Specifically, the location of her Apple Watch, details about a floodlight inside the house. FBI Special Agent in Charge Keith Janke confirmed the Bureau was taking at least one note seriously because it included facts tied to a deadline and a demand for funds. TMZ's Harvey Levin, who received a copy of the first note, described its level of specificity as striking. He noted the Apple Watch detail specifically, not where you'd necessarily immediately think to look for it, he said. On February 7th, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron stood together in an Instagram video and spoke directly to whoever was holding their mother. Savannah said, "We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." In doing this, the family publicly validated the ransom framing before law enforcement had formally confirmed it. Their willingness to state on camera that they had received a message and were responding to it established kidnapping for ransom as the dominant frame through which this case was understood, publicly and arguably within the investigation itself. By March 26th, nearly 2 months later, Savannah told Hoda Kotb that she believes 2 of the ransom notes the family received are legitimate, and that the others were likely from opportunists. But here is the critical question that no press conference has ever addressed. No agency has confirmed which notes, if any, came from someone actually holding Nancy Guthrie. No agency has confirmed whether the insider details in those notes, the Apple Watch location, the floodlight, came from her actual captor or from someone with separate knowledge of the home's interior. That is a list of people that investigators have never publicly described. And yet the ransom framework, introduced by the family before the notes arrived, reinforced by the family's public response, reaffirmed by Savannah in her first major interview, has remained the investigative and public center of gravity for this case. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas told Yahoo News that the ransom hypothesis looks less and less likely as time passes. He noted there are too many ways people can get caught in a genuine ransom operation. Multiple former FBI agents have characterized the complete absence of direct communication between the supposed kidnapper and the family as highly unusual. Traditional ransom kidnappings involve immediate, direct demands. Notes sent to television stations and tabloid websites rather than to the family directly is not how this works. The ambiguity in this case is not a feature of ransom kidnappings. It is an anomaly. And yet the framework persists, in part because the family named it first, and has continued to publicly affirm it. Let's step away from narrative framing and talk about what the independent forensic record shows, because it does show things, and those things are real. The FBI, working with Google, recovered footage from the Ring doorbell camera at Nancy's property. That camera had been physically torn from the wall, but the data it had captured was stored in Google's cloud servers, entirely inaccessible to anyone at the scene. The footage shows a real person at Nancy's front door, a man in a black ski mask. He approaches the door, covers the camera lens with his gloved hand, then gathers shrubbery from nearby and props it in front of the lens to obstruct the view more completely. He is wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a backpack that, at the time of the investigation, was sold exclusively at Walmart, though Nanos later acknowledged in a March interview that it may not have been purchased directly from the store. He is wearing gloves. He is carrying a firearm in an unusual center-waist holster position that analysts have flagged as a distinguishing characteristic. The FBI's forensic analysis puts him at approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 average build. There is a second image released by the FBI in which the backpack and firearm are absent. Investigators have confirmed that image was likely taken on a different day, meaning this man visited Nancy's front door more than once before the night of her disappearance. Law enforcement has confirmed to CNN that they believe the suspect may have conducted surveillance on the property as far back as January 11th. Investigators specifically requested that neighbors check their camera footage from that date, alongside January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st Street. Former Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb told Parade that the level of operational planning evident from the footage, a full backpack, armed entry, prior surveillance visits, strongly indicated advanced reconnaissance. His words, "Burglars don't go to burglarize a house with a full backpack. This was a kidnapping." In the early stages of the investigation, a black glove recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home became one of the most closely watched leads. Visually consistent with the gloves worn by the suspect on the doorbell footage, it contained DNA from an unknown male. That DNA was submitted to CODIS, the FBI's national database containing profiles from more than 19 million known offenders, and returned no match. Investigators then began the process of genetic genealogy analysis, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer decades after the crimes were committed. As of the most recent confirmed reporting, the Pima County Sheriff's Department disclosed that the glove DNA had been traced not to a suspect, but to a local restaurant employee who was confirmed to have no connection to the case. That lead is closed. What remains open is the DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home. The mixed profile that does not match Nancy or anyone in close contact to her. Nanos described it in early March as potentially containing material from several individuals, which makes extracting a clean, usable profile for a single suspect significantly more difficult. Investigators said they had submitted some of the DNA to the national database and received no hits. Nanos called it a viable lead that would take more time. That is where it stands as of this recording. Nancy's pacemaker disconnected at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. That timestamp remains the most forensically clean data point in the case. A vehicle was captured on Ring camera footage approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:36 a.m. on the same morning, 8 minutes after the pacemaker disconnected. Investigators have not been able to identify that vehicle. Nanos told NBC in March, "We're looking at it just like hundreds of thousands of other vehicles that were out driving at that time of day." This is the complete picture of what 58 days of investigation has produced. A real suspect on camera who has not been identified. DNA from inside the home that has produced no name. A glove lead that closed without resolution. A pacemaker timestamp. An unidentified vehicle. And a sheriff facing institutional collapse within his own department. On March 27, 2026, something happened that made it impossible to dismiss the questions being raised. Dr. Richard Carmona appeared on the News Nation program Brian Anton Investigates. Carmona is not a commentator. He is not an online analyst. He served as the 17th Surgeon General of the United States. He spent 3 decades with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, including years leading its SWAT team. He knows this department. He knows how crime scenes are supposed to be processed in this jurisdiction. He ran this department, and what he said on that broadcast is as direct a rebuke of the current investigation's integrity as anyone with his credentials has publicly offered. Carmona said the thing that alarmed him most, that, in his words, perplexed all of us, was the moment Sheriff Nanos publicly announced on television that he personally had opened the crime scene at Nancy's home. "That's not something a sheriff does," Carmona said. "It's the lead detective that's out there that says we can open this area now because we have made this determination that all of the evidence necessary has been photographed, bagged, tagged. A sheriff announcing the reopening of an active crime scene on television is a breach of the procedural separation that exists specifically to prevent command-level decisions from contaminating forensic-level work. Nanos then closed the scene again for further investigation, a reversal that Carmona said was essentially meaningless. Once it has been corrupted, that's the end of it. You cannot reconstitute a crime scene. Carmona also addressed footage that circulated showing a Domino's delivery car driving across Nancy's front lawn while the active investigation was underway. He noted bluntly, "If you're going to court and making a case, a defense attorney says that crime scene was corrupted. You had people delivering pizzas. How do we know this is real evidence?" He then raised a separate concern. Nanos reportedly chose to send physical evidence, not to the FBI for analysis, but to a private laboratory in Florida, citing cost savings. Carmona pointed out that federal forensic services are provided to local agencies at no charge. "The FBI doesn't charge you," he said. "The tax dollars are already supporting that." Bypassing the FBI lab in a case where the FBI is simultaneously one of the lead investigating agencies is the kind of bureaucratic fracture that defense attorneys exploit to challenge evidence chains in court. Carmona's remarks did not arrive in isolation. They followed a cascade of internal pressure that had been building for weeks. On March 24, 2026, the Pima County Deputies Organization, which represents more than 300 members of the Sheriff's Department, voted unanimously to pass a no-confidence motion against Nanos and called for his immediate resignation. That is not outside critics. That is his own department. Separately, the Arizona Republic reported that Nanos had resigned from the El Paso Police Department in 1982, 2 years earlier than listed on his public resume, to avoid termination over disciplinary issues, including excessive force, insubordination, and off-duty gambling. The Sheriff's Department attributed the discrepancy to clerical errors. On the following Tuesday, the Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to compel Nanos to answer questions under oath, citing a territorial-era state statute that could create a legal pathway to his removal from office. Pima County Supervisor Matt Hines told Newsweek that Nanos had betrayed the trust that their community placed in him. Nanos, for his part, rejected the criticism. He told KVOA, "I have no regrets about my team and their efforts. I don't regret we let the crime scene go too soon or any of that. That's just silly." Whether you find that reassuring or alarming probably tells you where you've been following this case from. What is not a matter of interpretation is this. A sitting sheriff who is simultaneously facing a no-confidence vote from his own deputies, a board-compelled deposition, and a public rebuke from a former U.S. Surgeon General who ran his same department, is not operating in a normal investigative environment. He is operating in conditions of institutional fragmentation, and those conditions matter for the evidence. Now I want to talk about the framework that online investigator Chris McDanafui, who posts under the account at True Crime Bab, has been building in detailed posts about this case. His credentials as a professional investigator are not publicly verified. He operates as an online analyst. But the substance of what he is describing is not his invention, and it is not fringe. The academic research behind it is extensive, credible, and peer-reviewed. And it is worth understanding precisely because it clarifies what this argument is actually about and what it is not about. In 2006, law professors Keith Findley and Michael Scott of the University of Wisconsin Law School published a paper that became one of the most cited documents in American criminal justice reform. The Multiple Dimensions of Tunnel Vision in Criminal Cases, published in the Wisconsin Law Review. It was subsequently cited by the Innocence Project, the Canadian Department of Justice, and criminal justice reform bodies across multiple countries. Their central finding was not that tunnel vision is the product of corrupt or careless investigators. It is, they documented, a natural cognitive tendency present in all human beings, including experienced forensic professionals, that becomes acutely dangerous in criminal investigation environments because of the irreversibility of the decisions being made. Findley and Scott define it as the result of several cognitive mechanisms working simultaneously. Confirmation bias, which causes people to interpret new information in ways that align with what they already believe. Hindsight bias, which makes past decisions appear more obviously correct than they were. And outcome bias, which causes people to evaluate the quality of a decision based on how it turned out, rather than on the quality of the process that produced it. Together, these mechanisms lead investigators to build a model of what happened, and then selectively filter all incoming evidence through that model, amplifying information that confirms it, and discounting information that doesn't. And here is the specific dimension that Findley and Scott flagged for high-profile cases. When an investigation operates under intense public scrutiny, political attention, and media pressure, the institutional and social cost of questioning the dominant narrative increases dramatically. The family of the victim has credibility. They are visibly grieving. They have been the most consistent and powerful public voice in the case. To challenge their account is not simply an analytical act. In the environment of a nationally covered case involving one of the most recognizable television journalists in the country, it is a socially and professionally costly one. The research is explicit. Pressure to produce results quickly, combined with the presence of an early influential narrative, is precisely the condition under which tunnel vision accelerates. Now consider the specific conditions of this investigation. Law enforcement arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home after the family had already been there for up to an hour. Their first report of the crime scene came from people who had already processed it emotionally and physically. The ransom theory was named by a family member before any note arrived. The family became the primary public voice on which notes were real. The crime scene was later described as corrupted by a former sheriff who ran this same department. Evidence was sent to a private lab in Florida instead of the FBI for cost reasons, in a case where federal forensic services are free. The lead detective's oversight was bypassed when the sheriff personally announced the reopening of the scene on television. The deputies voted unanimously to remove their own sheriff. The Board of Supervisors moved to compel testimony under oath. And 58 days in, with all of that context, there is still no arrest, no named suspect, and no public explanation for why investigators believe the house was targeted. What McDanafui is asking, and what Carmona's comments have now made impossible to dismiss as fringe speculation, is whether this investigation has ever done what the legal and criminological literature recommends for every high-profile case: a formal, structured case rethinking. An independent review of the dominant theory, conducted deliberately from outside the framework that was established in the first hours. Not to implicate the family, not to contradict the forensic evidence, but to ensure that the narrative they provided in those first critical hours, the doors, the blood, the ransom framing, has been independently stress-tested, rather than simply confirmed by evidence gathered within its own assumptions. This protocol has a name in the research literature. It has been adopted as formal policy in countries whose criminal justice systems have reckoned with the consequences of tunnel vision in high-profile cases. The Canadian government recommended it after reviewing wrongful convictions nationally. The Netherlands built an entire investigative reform program around it. The Innocence Project advocates for it in every case where public pressure and early narrative framing are present. The question of whether it has been applied here, whether anyone outside the primary investigative team has been brought in to interrogate the framework rather than build within it, has not been answered publicly. What has been publicly stated is this. Nanos told NBC Nightly News in March 2026 that investigators believe they know why the home was targeted, that the attack was targeted, but that he cannot confirm it with 100% certainty. He said there is information in this case he cannot share publicly without compromising the investigation. A Las Vegas-based criminal defense attorney, Peter Christensen, told Newsweek that the silence from investigators likely signals a shift from broad public outreach to what he called more clinical evidence consolidation. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Lance Leasing told CBS News that silence from experienced agents can mean they are on to something, and acknowledged that every passing day makes evidence weaker and leads more difficult to develop. All of that may be true. The investigation may be moving, There may be a thread being pulled in the background that the public cannot see. But the facts on the record right now do not exist in a vacuum. They exist alongside the argument that online investigators are making, and that a former Pima County sheriff has now confirmed about the conditions under which this investigation has been conducted. Let me be precise about what the questions raised in this video are, and what they are not. They are not accusations. They are not conspiracy theories. They are not attacks on the Guthrie family, who have suffered something that none of us can fully comprehend, and who have been publicly cleared by law enforcement. They are questions about process. About whether the track that this investigation was set on in its first hours has ever been examined from the outside. About whether the dominant narrative, ransom kidnapping, local perpetrator, targeted home, has been stress-tested or simply reinforced by evidence gathered within its own assumptions. Because those are the questions that the research literature, the forensic record, and a former U.S. Surgeon General who ran this exact department are now asking out loud. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 58 days. There is no arrest. There is no named suspect. The sheriff's department is in institutional crisis. The crime scene, by the account of one of the most credentialed law enforcement voices in this region, has been corrupted. And somewhere out there, an 84-year-old woman, who should be at her mailbox on a good day, who should be at her online church service every Sunday, who should be at her daughter's house for Saturday dinner, is not. That is the only fact that matters. If this analysis raised questions you haven't heard asked before, drop them in the comments. Not speculation, not accusations, the kind of detail-driven, documented thinking that this case demands. Because 58 days in, with no arrest, and a former county sheriff calling this crime scene corrupted, the pressure to keep asking the right questions has never been more important than it is right now.